Our dispatch log said the same thing. 1 fatality. 1 vehicle. But when we arrived at 2:47 a.m. and set up our floods, we counted 3 sets of shoes. 3 distinct blood trails leading away from the impact point. And a child's booster seat, still buckled, in the back of a car the coroner had documented as containing 1 adult male, alone. I need to explain how this job actually works before the rest of this makes sense. My name is Danny Reeves. I'm a biohazard remediation technician for a company called CleanPath Services, based out of Dayton, Ohio. We hold a state contract for post-incident remediation on closed highway segments across 14 counties in southwestern Ohio and parts of eastern Indiana. When there's a fatal accident on a major highway and the scene has been processed by law enforcement and the medical examiner's office, we're the ones who come in after. We clean what's left. Blood, glass, fluids, tissue, whatever the crash deposited on the road surface, the guardrails, the median cable barriers, or the surrounding terrain. We neutralize it, bag it, log it, and restore the road to a condition where ODOT can reopen the lanes. It's not glamorous. Most people don't even know our job exists. They drive past a spot where someone died 12 hours earlier and the asphalt looks normal. That's us. That's what we did between 3 a.m. and dawn while they were sleeping. I've been doing this for 4 years. Before me, the crew chief was a guy named Terrence Mull, who did it for 11. Before him, the company had a different name and a different contract structure, but the work was the same. There's always someone cleaning up after the worst thing that ever happened to somebody. Our crew operates in teams of 4. Me, Ray Dominguez, Cass Lahane, and our crew chief Malcolm Sow. Malcolm's the one who trained me. He's been with CleanPath for 7 years, came in from fire service hazmat. He doesn't talk much. When he does, it's procedural, clipped, and worth listening to. The way a call works is this: ODOT dispatch routes us through their traffic management center in Columbus. We receive a scene release notification, meaning law enforcement, the me, and the accident reconstructionist have all signed off and the physical scene is no longer evidentiary. Until that release comes through, we don't touch anything. That's not a guideline. It's law. Tampering with an unreleased scene is a felony, and our contract makes it crystal clear that our access window begins at the moment of formal release and not 1 second before. We get the release notification on a company tablet. It includes the incident number, the ODOT closure reference, the mile marker range, lane configuration, the number and type of vehicles involved, the number of fatalities and injuries, and a brief narrative summary, usually 3 or 4 sentences written by whoever handled the scene handoff. That summary is what we use to plan our approach. A single vehicle rollover on a dry median needs different equipment than a multi-vehicle pileup with a fuel spill on wet asphalt. We stage our gear before we roll out. We wear full Tyvek suits, P100 respirators, nitrile gloves over cut-resistant liners, and steel-toe boots with disposable covers. Everything that contacts the scene goes into red biohazard bags. Those bags go into DOT-compliant drums. The drums go to a licensed incineration facility in Middletown. There's a chain of custody form for every drum. I've filled out hundreds of them. The work itself is physical. Hands and knees on asphalt with enzyme sprays and stiff brushes. Portable pressure washers for guardrails. Scraping tools for material that's dried or bonded to surfaces. ATP testing swabs to verify decontamination thresholds before we sign off and ODOT reopens. We usually work between midnight and 6 a.m. because that's when traffic volumes are lowest and closures cause the least disruption. Sometimes we work in daylight if the closure is extended, but most of our jobs happen in the dark, under our own portable light towers, in the strange quiet of a highway that's supposed to be full of cars but isn't. It's peaceful, in a way I don't know how to explain to people who haven't done it. An interstate highway at 3 a.m. with no traffic, just the hum of our generators and the sweep of our floods across empty lanes. It's like the world paused. Everything's still. And in that stillness, you do the careful, methodical work of erasing the evidence that someone's life ended right here, right on this spot, probably terrified, probably in pain, probably not knowing it was their last few seconds alive. You learn not to think about that part too much. The call for I-70 westbound, mile marker 214, came in on a Tuesday in early October. Dispatch routed it at 1:58 a.m. Scene release had been issued at 1:41 a.m. The summary read: Single vehicle fatal. 2019 Honda Civic, westbound, departed roadway and struck concrete bridge abutment at estimated 70 plus mph. Single adult male occupant, deceased at scene. No passengers. No other vehicles involved. Me has removed remains. Roadway surface contamination moderate. Closure through 0600. Standard. Straightforward. We staged our gear and rolled out of the Dayton yard by 2:15 a.m. Malcolm drove. Ray sat up front. Cass and I rode in the back of the box truck with the equipment, doing our pre-deployment checks the way Malcolm taught us: fluid inventory, brush condition, pump pressure, light tower fuel levels, biohazard drum count, swab kits sealed, paperwork pre-filled with the incident number. We arrived at 2:47 a.m. ODOT had the closure cones up starting at mile marker 213. 2 patrol cars were still on site, parked on the shoulder with their light bars running. One of the troopers waved us through. I didn't recognize him. Malcolm exchanged a few words with the other one, a woman, older, sergeant's bars, and she handed him a signed hard copy of the scene release. Malcolm checked it against the digital version on the tablet. Everything matched. We pulled past the patrol cars and drove slowly up to the scene. The bridge abutment was at mile marker 214.2. The impact point was visible immediately, a massive gouge in the concrete, fresh and pale against the weathered gray. Debris field extending about 40 feet back from the abutment, spread across the right lane and the shoulder. Glass, plastic trim pieces, a section of bumper cover, fragments of headlight assembly. All normal. All expected. We set up our floods. Malcolm walked the perimeter first, alone. That's standard. He does a visual assessment before anyone else steps into the zone. He carries a clipboard and a camera. He photographs everything. He notes the extent of biological contamination, the surface types involved, and any hazards: exposed rebar, fuel puddles, sharp metal, anything that could injure the crew. He came back after about 12 minutes. Moderate contamination on the road surface, concentrated right lane between the 30-foot and 15-foot marks from the abutment. Some splatter on the abutment face and the base of the guardrail. Standard enzyme and pressure wash. Cass, you take the guardrail. Ray, road surface. Danny, abutment. I'll handle the shoulder and drainage. We geared up. Full PPE. Respirators on. I grabbed my bucket of enzyme concentrate, the sprayer, 2 brushes, and a roll of absorbent pads, and walked toward the abutment. That's when I saw the shoes. 3 pairs. Arranged in a rough line on the shoulder, about 10 feet past the abutment, on the far side of the guardrail where the embankment drops off toward a drainage ditch. A pair of men's work boots, brown, lace-up, heavily worn. A pair of women's slip-on sneakers, white with a floral print, size 7 or 8. And a pair of children's shoes, small, red, with Velcro straps. Maybe a size 10 toddlers. They were placed. Not scattered. Not thrown from the vehicle. Placed deliberately, side by side, toes pointing toward the road, as if 3 people had taken off their shoes, lined them up neatly, and walked away barefoot into the drainage ditch. I stood there for probably 15 seconds before I called Malcolm over. He looked at them. He didn't touch them. He took 4 photographs. Then he walked back to the patrol car and spoke with the sergeant for several minutes. I couldn't hear what they said. When he came back, his face was the same as always, flat, procedural, unreadable. Not ours, he said. Pre-existing. Unrelated to the incident. Leave them. Malcolm, those are children's shoes. I heard you. Leave them. Start on the abutment. So I started on the abutment. It took me about 40 minutes to enzyme treat, scrub, and pressure wash the concrete face. The work was normal. The contamination was consistent with the summary, a high-speed single-occupant impact. Biological material concentrated at the point of collision, with diminishing splatter radiating outward. I've cleaned enough of these to know what a single body looks like when it hits concrete at 70 miles per hour. It's not something I'm going to describe in detail. But I know the pattern. I know the volume. I know what one person produces. This was not one person. I didn't say that out loud. Not then. But I knew it. The volume of biological material on the abutment face was wrong. It was too much. Not dramatically, not like a bus crash or a multi-fatality, but enough that my hands slowed down and my brain started doing the math it does automatically after 4 years of this work. The amount of tissue embedded in the concrete scoring. The spread pattern on the base of the guardrail. The 3 separate blood trails I noticed when I walked back to refill my sprayer. 3 trails. Distinct. Diverging from the impact point at different angles. One ran along the shoulder toward the drainage ditch, toward the shoes. One crossed the right lane and faded at the median cable barrier. The third went backward, against the direction of travel, toward the debris field, and ended at a point where the asphalt was stained in a shape I'd never seen before. Not a pool. Not a smear. More like a seated impression. As if someone had sat down in their own blood and stayed there for a while. I photographed all of it. That's within protocol. Our documentation is part of the remediation record, not evidentiary. The scene was already released, but CleanPath requires photographic logs of every job for liability and quality assurance purposes. I photograph before, during, and after. Every technician does. The photos are uploaded to a company server and retained for 7 years. I kept working. We all did. Around 3:30 a.m., Cass called me over to the guardrail. "Look at this," she said. She was pointing her flashlight at the inner face of the W-beam, about 2 feet above the ground. There were marks in the biological material, not splatter patterns, but impressions. Handprints. Small ones. Too small for an adult. Pressed into the drying blood on the guardrail surface, then dragged laterally, as if the person had been gripping the rail and sliding along it. Child-sized handprints. In a scene documented as containing one adult male, alone. Malcolm. He came over. He looked. He photographed them. He said nothing for about 10 seconds. Clean it, he said. Same protocol. Malcolm, those are. I know what they are. Clean it. That's the job. Cass and I exchanged a look. She's been doing this longer than me, 6 years, and I've seen her face after bad scenes. She doesn't rattle. But she was rattled. I could see it in the way her hands moved, slightly too fast, slightly too precise, the way you work when you're trying not to think. We cleaned it. By 4:15 a.m., we'd finished the primary remediation. Ray was doing the final ATP swabs on the road surface. I was bagging the last of the absorbent pads. Malcolm was on the phone with dispatch, confirming our timeline for ODOT's reopening schedule. I walked back to the shoulder to check if I'd missed anything near the drainage area. The shoes were gone. All 3 pairs. Gone. The grass where they'd been was pressed flat, but the shoes were simply not there anymore. I looked down the embankment toward the ditch. Nothing. I swept my flashlight across the tree line beyond the ditch. Nothing moved. No sound except the generators. I stood there for a long time. I didn't tell Malcolm the shoes were gone. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I knew what he'd say. Maybe because I was already starting to feel that specific kind of quiet that builds in your chest when something is wrong and you can't make it anyone else's problem because there's no mechanism for reporting it. Our forms have fields for surface type, contamination level, chemicals used, disposal drum count, ATP readings. There is no field for items not consistent with the incident summary or evidence of undocumented occupants or children's shoes that appeared and then vanished on a closed highway at 3 a.m. There's no field for what I actually saw. We signed off the scene at 5:22 a.m. ODOT reopened the westbound lanes at 5:45 a.m. By the time the first commuters drove over mile marker 214, there was no trace of what had happened there. Not the crash. Not the blood. Not the shoes. Not the handprints on the guardrail. We drove back to the yard in silence. I filed my photo log that afternoon. I uploaded 47 images. When I reviewed them on the server the next morning, there were 47 images in the file. The 4 photographs of the shoes were among them. But the shoes in the photographs were different. In the images I had taken, there were 3 pairs of shoes, men's boots, women's sneakers, children's red Velcro shoes, arranged neatly on the shoulder. In the images now stored on the server, there were 3 pairs of shoes arranged neatly on the shoulder. But the children's shoes were not red. They were blue. And there was a 4th pair. A 4th pair I had not seen. Had not photographed. Small canvas sneakers, faded gray, placed behind the others, closer to the guardrail. The image was sharp. The lighting was consistent with my other photographs. The metadata showed my camera, my timestamp, my GPS coordinates. I had taken a photograph of something I had never seen. I opened my personal phone. I had taken backup shots with it, I always do, a habit Malcolm doesn't know about and wouldn't approve of. I scrolled to the timestamp. 3 pairs of shoes. Red children's shoes. No 4th pair. No blue. The server showed one version of reality. My phone showed another. Neither matched what I remembered, because what I remembered was 3 pairs of shoes that were there and then were not there. I closed both files and sat in my car in the CleanPath parking lot for 20 minutes, doing nothing. The second incident was 11 days later. Interstate 75 southbound, mile marker 38, just north of the Piqua interchange. Multi-vehicle collision. Summary said 3 vehicles, 4 total occupants, 2 fatalities, 2 transported to Upper Valley Medical Center. The scene release came in at 11:47 p.m. We rolled out at midnight. This one was bigger. 2 passenger vehicles and a pickup truck. The pickup had crossed the median and hit one of the passenger cars head-on. The second passenger car rear-ended the first. The fatalities were in the first car, the one that took the head-on. Driver and front passenger, both deceased at scene. We arrived and set up. Standard protocol. Malcolm walked the perimeter. The debris field was extensive, nearly 100 feet of scattered material across both the southbound lanes and part of the median. Fuel had spilled but been absorbed by the fire department. Glass everywhere. The contamination was significant. Malcolm assigned zones. I took the median. It was the hardest section, the point of head-on impact, where the biological material was thickest and most deeply bonded to the surface. I worked methodically. Enzyme spray. Wait time. Scrub. Pressure wash. Absorbent pads for pooled material. Repeat. The concrete median barrier had taken the worst of it. I was on my knees, scrubbing the base of the barrier, when my brush hit something that wasn't asphalt and wasn't biological. It was paper. A folded piece of paper, wedged into the joint between the barrier base and the road surface, soaked in blood. I extracted it with forceps, standard procedure for foreign objects in the contamination zone. Everything gets bagged and logged. We don't read it. We don't analyze it. It goes in the bag. But the paper unfolded as I pulled it free, and I couldn't help seeing what was on it. It was a child's drawing. Crayon on white paper. A house with a green lawn and a yellow sun. 3 stick figures in front of the house, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one. The word Daddy was written above the tallest figure in uneven block letters. Below the house, in the same handwriting, it said, "Come home safe." The incident summary said 4 occupants across 3 vehicles. 2 deceased adults. 2 surviving adults transported to the hospital. No children. No child seats. No child-related items in any of the vehicle inventories, I checked later. This drawing had not come from any of the vehicles in the accident. I bagged it. I logged it. I kept working. At 2:10 a.m., Ray called out from the far end of the debris field. He'd found something. When I walked over, he was standing at the edge of the closure zone, where our cones met the open shoulder, staring at the pavement. There was a pattern on the asphalt. Not blood, something else. Something lighter, almost translucent, visible only because our floods were hitting it at a low angle. It looked like it had been laid down wet and dried in place. The pattern was regular. Repeated. It took me a few seconds to parse it. Footprints. Bare footprints. Small ones. Leading from the debris field toward the shoulder, then off the road surface, into the grass, toward the tree line. Ray looked at me. "Those aren't from the scene," he said. "No. There weren't any kids." "No." We stood there. The footprints were perfect, each one distinct, each showing 5 toes, the ball of the foot, the heel. They were slightly luminescent under our floods, as if whatever fluid had made them caught light differently than water or blood. I followed them with my flashlight. They went across the shoulder, through the grass of the embankment, and ended at the tree line. No, they didn't end. They continued, faintly, on the dry leaves just inside the tree line. I could see 3 more prints before the darkness made it impossible. Whoever made them was walking away from the crash. Small. Barefoot. Not running. Walking. At a steady, even pace. I turned back to Ray. He was already radioing Malcolm. Malcolm came. He looked. He stood at the edge of the footprints for a long time, longer than I'd ever seen him look at anything. "Photograph them," he said. "Then clean them." "Shouldn't we?" "The scene is released, Danny. There's nothing to report. We remediate and we leave. That's the contract. These aren't part of the incident. Someone was here. A child was here." Malcolm looked at me directly. In 4 years, I can count on one hand the number of times Malcolm Sow has looked at me directly during an active job, and every one of those times something was wrong. "Photograph them," he said again, slowly. "Clean the ones on the road surface. Leave the ones in the grass. We don't operate off the roadway. That's ODOT's boundary." He walked back to his zone. I photographed the footprints. 11 images. I cleaned the ones on the asphalt. It took almost nothing, a single pass with the enzyme sprayer, and they dissolved instantly, as if they'd been waiting to be erased. The ones in the grass, the ones beyond our boundary, I left. When we came back past that spot 40 minutes later to pack up the light tower, I checked. The footprints in the grass were gone. The leaves were dry. The tree line was still and silent. I uploaded my photos at the end of shift. The next day, I checked the server. The footprint images were there. All 11. But in every image, the footprints were leading in the opposite direction. Toward the crash. Not away from it. Small bare feet walking toward a head-on collision, not away from it. I checked my phone backup. Away from the crash. Exactly as I'd seen them. Exactly as I'd shot them. The server showed something coming. My phone showed something leaving. I didn't know which was worse. After the second incident, I started keeping a private log. Not a formal one, just a composition notebook I kept in my glove compartment. Dates, mile markers, observations that didn't fit the remediation forms. I didn't tell anyone. Not Malcolm, not Cass, not Ray. I wrote in it after each shift while the details were fresh, sitting in my car in the yard with a thermos of coffee and the radio off. Over the next 6 weeks, we worked 19 scenes. Most were normal. Some were awful in the ordinary way, the way that fills your sleep with images you'd rather not carry but can't put down. A motorcycle rider on US 35. A wrong-way driver on I-675. A family of 5 in a van that rolled. The work was the same. Enzyme, scrub, wash, swab, sign off. But in 5 of those 19 scenes, I found things that didn't belong. At mile marker 167 on I-70 eastbound, a single fatality truck collision, a woman's cardigan sweater, clean and dry, folded neatly on top of the concrete barrier, 40 feet from the impact point. The scene summary listed 1 male driver. No passengers. No female clothing in the vehicle inventory. I photographed it, left it because it was outside the contamination zone, and it was gone when I walked back past the spot 20 minutes later. At mile marker 22 on I-75 northbound, a two-fatality rear-end collision, a row of 7 coins arranged on the fog line, spaced exactly 2 inches apart, heads up, in descending order of denomination. Quarter, dime, nickel, 5 pennies. The total was 46 cents. The coins were placed inside the contamination zone but had no biological material on them, as if they'd been set down after the blood dried. I bagged them. When I checked the evidence bag at the yard, there were 8 coins. The additional coin was a $50 I had not collected because it had not been there. At mile marker 91 on I-70 westbound, a single fatality departure from roadway, a complete pair of eyeglasses, prescription, women's frames, sitting on the dashboard of our box truck when we returned from the remediation zone. No one on the crew wears glasses. The scene had involved a male driver with 20/20 vision per his license. The glasses were real. I had them in my hand. I put them in a clear evidence bag and labeled them with the incident number and the date. The next morning, the evidence bag was still in the truck's side compartment. It was sealed. It was labeled in my handwriting. It was empty. I wrote all of this down. At a 2-vehicle fatality on US 35 near Xenia, a smell. Not the smell of the scene, that I know, that I can work through, but something underneath it. Something sweet and domestic. Like laundry detergent. Like a fabric softener sheet in a warm dryer. It came and went, strongest at the exact center of the impact zone, and it didn't dissipate when I sprayed the enzyme. It lingered after the biological material was gone. It was still there when we did the final ATP swabs. It was still there when we packed up. I asked Cass if she smelled it. She said no. I asked Ray. He hesitated, which was not the same as saying no, and then he said he didn't want to talk about it. That was the first time I understood that I might not be the only one. I waited 2 days. Then I went to Ray's apartment on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced, with a 6-pack and the composition notebook. He let me in. He looked tired. He looked like he'd been looking tired for a while and had stopped trying to hide it. I sat at his kitchen table and opened the notebook. I didn't explain. I just started reading entries. The shoes on I-70. The handprints on the guardrail. The child's drawing in the median. The footprints that reversed direction on the server. The cardigan. The coins. The eyeglasses that emptied themselves from a sealed bag. The smell. Ray didn't interrupt. He didn't look surprised. When I finished, he got up, went to his bedroom, and came back with a phone, not his current phone, an older one, cracked screen, powered off. He plugged it in and waited for it to boot. I stopped carrying this on jobs about 8 months ago, he said. After the thing on 675. He opened the photo gallery and handed it to me. The photos were from a scene on I-675, a 3-vehicle fatality that had happened about 3 months before I noticed the shoes. I hadn't been on that call, it was my night off. Ray, Cass, and Malcolm had worked it with a substitute tech. The images showed standard scene documentation. Debris. Contamination patterns. Equipment staging. All normal. Until the last 6 photos. The first showed the inside of a vehicle, the driver's side of what appeared to be the 3rd car in the pileup, a sedan. The seat was reclined almost flat. The seat was clean. No blood, no material, no contamination. But there was an impression in the seat fabric. A body-shaped depression. As if someone had been lying there and gotten up. The scene summary said the vehicle was unoccupied at the time of impact. It had been parked on the shoulder with its hazards on. The driver had exited and was standing outside when the collision occurred. He survived. He was transported. The car was empty. But the impression was there. Fresh. Deep. The shape of a person lying on their side, knees drawn up. The shape of someone sleeping. The second through fifth photos showed the exterior of the same vehicle at progressive distances. And in each image, there was a figure standing at the edge of the frame. Not in the scene. Not in the closure zone. Standing on the far shoulder, maybe 50 meters away, partially obscured by the light tower's glare. Small. Motionless. Facing the camera. In each successive image, closer. The sixth photo was taken from inside Cleanpath's box truck, through the rear window, after the crew had loaded up and was leaving the scene. The figure was standing in the right lane, centered in the frame, directly under one of the ODOT closure signs. It was a child. Maybe 5 or 6 years old. Wearing a light-colored shirt and dark pants. Bare feet. Standing alone on a closed interstate highway at 4 a.m., watching the truck drive away. Ray took the phone back. "I showed Malcolm," he said. The next day. He looked at all 6 photos. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked me how many were in the set. "You said 6. He said there were 7. Ray pulled the phone back up and counted. 6 photos. He'd counted them 100 times. Always 6. "Malcolm sees 7, Ray said. "Every time. He says the 7th one shows the kid standing at our loading bay door. At the yard. Hours after the job." He paused. "I can't see it. He says it's right there. The 7th in the sequence. I scroll through and I count 6. He watches me scroll through and he counts 7. Same phone. Same screen. Same photos." I sat with that for a while. "What does Malcolm say about all of this?" I asked. "Nothing. Same as always. Nothing. He just works. He cleans the scene. He documents what he sees. He files the paperwork. And every once in a while, he looks at something a little too long, and then he says, 'Clean it,' and walks away." "How long has this been happening?" Ray shook his head. "I don't know. I noticed it 8 months ago. But the more I think back, the more I find things I didn't register at the time. Little things. Stuff I filed under weird and forgot about. A shoe. A toy. A smell. Something moved between when I put it down and picked it up. I think it's been happening the whole time, Danny. I think we just weren't looking. Or we were looking and it wasn't there yet." He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. Over the next month, I changed how I worked. I didn't change my protocol, Malcolm would have noticed, but I changed my attention. I started looking at parts of the scene that weren't in the contamination zone. The shoulders. The tree lines. The drainage ditches. The places where no one had died and no remediation was needed. The places we had no professional reason to examine. That's where I found them. Not at every scene. Not even at most scenes. But at certain scenes, always fatal, always on the highway, always during the overnight closure, there were objects that shouldn't have been there. Personal items. Domestic items. A hairbrush. A coffee mug with lipstick on the rim. A dog's leash, clipped to nothing, lying across the fog line as if someone had just set it down. A pair of reading glasses on a guardrail post. A grocery list, handwritten, pinned under a rock at the base of a drainage culvert. Milk, bread, apple juice, pull-ups, the good cereal. Items from a life. From a home. From a family that didn't exist in any incident report. And the smell. That warm, domestic smell, dryer sheets, clean laundry, heated fabric, appearing in the center of impact zones where people had died alone. As if the violence of the crash had broken something open, and what leaked out wasn't just blood and fuel but the ghost of a household. The residue of a life that had been built around the person who died. Not a haunting. Not a presence. More like a stain. A stain that left physical objects behind. I was finding the personal effects of people who had never been in the vehicles. People who might never have existed. Items from homes that may never have been built. Evidence of families that no record documented and no survivor claimed. And after every scene, the items disappeared. By the time we packed up, they were gone. Not cleaned. Not collected. Simply no longer there. But they were in my photographs. Always. And on the server, they were always slightly different. One more item. Or one fewer. Or the same items rearranged. Or an item I'd photographed now appearing in a location I hadn't visited. The server was not being altered by anyone at CleanPath. I checked the access logs. No one touched the image files between my upload and my review. The metadata was consistent. The timestamps were correct. The images on the server were photographically legitimate, proper lighting, proper angle, proper lens distortion for my camera at that distance. They were real photographs of things that were wrong. I want to be very precise about this, because this is where people tend to think I'm either lying or losing it, and I understand that. I'd think the same thing. The photographs on the server were not tampered with. They were not edited. They were not generated or inserted by someone with access. They were photographs I took, with my camera, at scenes I worked, showing objects I saw, but altered in small, specific ways that made them show a reality slightly adjacent to the one I experienced. My phone backups showed what I saw. The server showed something else. Both were real. Both were mine. Both were impossible. I went to Malcolm. It was a Thursday afternoon, end of shift, everyone else gone. He was in the office doing paperwork. I sat down across from him and put the composition notebook on the desk. I know about the scenes, I said. He didn't look up. I know about the objects. The shoes. The handprints. The smell. The photographs. I know Ray knows. I think Cass knows. I'm asking you to tell me what this is. Malcolm finished writing whatever he was writing. He put down his pen. He closed his folder. Then he looked at me. When I started at CleanPath, he said, the crew chief was a woman named Gail Oster. She'd been doing the work for 9 years. She told me one thing that wasn't in the training manual. She said, the highway gives things back. He paused. I thought she was talking about the emotional side. The way you carry scenes with you. The way certain images come back at night. I figured it was a metaphor. It wasn't. No, he leaned back. It wasn't. The objects started showing up about 2 months after I began working scenes. Small things. I thought I was seeing accident debris. Then I found a birthday card at a single vehicle fatality. The person who died was alone. No family. No emergency contact. Lived in a studio apartment in Eaton. But the birthday card said, "Happy 4th birthday, Emma," and had a butterfly sticker on it, and it was tucked under the guardrail post like someone had placed it there on purpose. And it disappeared. By the time I walked back from the truck. Yes. And the photographs. My photographs showed the card. The server photographs showed 2 cards. The second one said, "We miss you, Daddy." I never took that picture. He looked at the notebook. "Gail warned me," he said. "She said the highway gives things back, but not to the right people. The objects belong to the lives the dead were going to have. The families they were going to build. The homes they were going to live in. When they die on the road, all of that, all the future that was in them, it doesn't go anywhere. It comes out. It precipitates, like condensation. And we're the ones who are there to see it, because we're the ones who come after everyone else leaves." I didn't say anything. "The children," he said. "The shoes. The footprints. The handprints. The figure Ray photographed. Those are the children who were never going to be born. A man dies at 26 on a highway, alone, at 2 a.m., and the future he was carrying, the wife, the daughter, the apartment with the laundry and the dryer, it has to go somewhere. It manifests. It lingers. And then it evaporates. Every single time. By the time we leave, it's gone. We can't preserve it. We can't collect it. We can't report it. We can only see it while we're there, in the closure, in the quiet, in the dark. And the server photos." Malcolm shook his head. "I don't know." Gail didn't know either. She said the images drift. The objects in the photographs shift because the futures they represent were never fixed. They were possibilities. The server doesn't show what you saw, it shows what could have been. A different version. A slightly different child. One more person at the birthday party. One fewer. The server shows the lives flickering. Malcolm, this sounds. I know what it sounds like. That's why Gail told me one thing and nothing else, and why I'm telling you one thing and nothing else, and why there's no protocol for it and no form and no incident report and no one to call. Because the moment you try to make it official, it's gone. Not suppressed. Not covered up. Gone. The objects don't appear for people who are looking for them. They appear for people who are on their hands and knees scrubbing blood off the road at 3 a.m. because that's their job and they're not thinking about anything except the work. So we just do the work. We clean the scene. We see what we see. And we go home. He picked up his pen and went back to his paperwork. That was 7 months ago. I still work at CleanPath. I still ride in the back of the box truck with Cass, checking pump pressure and counting biohazard drums. I still put on my Tyvek and my respirator and get on my knees on dark highways and scrub the asphalt until the ATP reader shows green. And I still find things. Last Tuesday, mile marker 77 on I-70 westbound. A 43-year-old woman, single, no children, struck the cable barrier at highway speed. We arrived at 3:15 a.m. In the median grass, just outside our work boundary, I found a music box. Silver, tarnished, the kind you wind with a small key. It was open. The mechanism inside was still turning, slowly, playing something I almost recognized, a lullaby, maybe, or a song from a movie I saw as a kid. It played for the entire 90 minutes we were on scene. When we packed up, it was gone. On the server, the photograph I took of the music box shows a music box that is closed and silent. Beside it, lying in the grass, is a small hand mirror with a crack across the glass. On my phone, the photograph shows the music box, open and playing. Neither photograph shows what I saw in the last seconds before I walked away from it. Because what I saw, in those last seconds, was a pair of small hands reaching up out of the grass to close the lid. I clean accident scenes on closed highways. That is my job. I am not writing this as a warning or a confession. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I don't have a theory. I don't have an explanation. I don't even have a consistent record, because the record changes depending on which device I check. What I have is this: somewhere, on every dark highway where someone dies alone, the future they were carrying spills out alongside the blood. It takes the shape of the people they would have loved. It leaves their shoes by the guardrail and their drawings in the median and their handprints on the steel. It smells like their home. It sounds like the song their daughter would have fallen asleep to. And then it's gone. And we clean what's left. And we drive back to the yard. And the road reopens, and 40,000 cars a day drive over the spot, and none of them know. None of them feel it. None of them slow down. Last week I drove past mile marker 214 on my day off. Westbound. Normal traffic. I wasn't thinking about anything. The radio was on. I was going to the hardware store. As I passed the bridge abutment, I smelled dryer sheets. Clean laundry. A warm house. And for just a moment, maybe a quarter of a second, maybe less, I heard a child laughing from the back seat of my car. I live alone. I've never been married. I don't have children. But I checked the rearview mirror. And the booster seat was there. It was there for the length of a breath. Gray fabric, scuffed plastic frame, a faded blue strap with a cartoon whale on the buckle. The kind you'd see in any grocery store parking lot, clipped into any sedan, holding any 2-year-old who was kicking their feet and dropping Cheerios between the cushions. Then I blinked, and it was gone. I pulled over. I pulled onto the shoulder at mile marker 215, a quarter mile past the abutment, and I put the car in park and I sat there with both hands on the wheel and the engine running and the radio still playing whatever it had been playing, and I did not turn around. I did not look in the rearview mirror again. I stared straight ahead at the highway and I breathed and I waited for my heart rate to come down. It took 7 minutes. I counted them on the dashboard clock. When I finally looked, the back seat was empty. Completely empty. No booster seat. No impression. No strap. Nothing. But there was a smell. Faint, sweet, vanishing even as I registered it. Baby shampoo. The no tears kind. The kind that comes in a yellow bottle and smells like nothing else on earth. I drove to the hardware store. I bought the drill bits I needed. I drove home. I made dinner. I sat on my couch and ate spaghetti from a bowl and watched a show I can't remember the name of, and at 9:47 p.m. I opened my composition notebook and wrote the date and the mile marker and the word booster, and then I closed the notebook and put it back in my bag and went to bed. I didn't sleep. The next shift was Saturday night. 3-vehicle fatality on US 35 near Jamestown. We got the call at 1:12 a.m. Standard summary: pickup truck crossed the center line, struck an SUV head-on, SUV pushed into a following sedan. 2 fatalities, the pickup driver and the SUV's front passenger. 3 survivors transported. Scene released at 1:49 a.m. We arrived at 2:20 a.m. The scene was extensive. Malcolm walked the perimeter. He came back and assigned zones. Mine was the SUV's final resting position. It had spun after impact and come to rest perpendicular to the roadway, blocking both lanes. The contamination was concentrated on the passenger side, where the fatality had occurred. I worked. Enzyme, scrub, wash. The night was cold, mid-30s, clear sky, no wind. Our breath fogged inside our respirators. The floods threw hard white light across the pavement, and beyond that light, the darkness was absolute. Rural highway. No streetlights. No houses. Just fields and tree lines and the deep quiet of a road that had been emptied of everything except us. At 3:05 a.m., I finished the primary treatment on the SUV's resting zone and moved to the road surface where the vehicle had spun. There were drag marks, tire rubber and fluid trails arcing across the lanes. Standard. I followed them with my sprayer, treating the biological components, leaving the tire marks for ODOT to handle on their own schedule. The arc of the spin took me across the westbound lane and onto the far shoulder. The contamination thinned as I moved away from the center of the scene. By the time I reached the shoulder, I was only finding trace amounts, small drops, widely spaced, the kind that might not even be visible in daylight but that show up under our floods like scattered orange sparks against the gray asphalt. I was following these trace drops toward the drainage ditch when I saw the light. Not our light. Not a flashlight. Not a reflection. A light inside the drainage ditch, about 30 feet ahead of me, at the bottom of the concrete channel. It was warm. Yellowish. Steady. The color of a lamp behind a curtain. I stopped. The drainage ditch at that location was a standard ODOT precast channel, maybe 4 feet deep, 3 feet wide, running parallel to the highway for 100 yards before entering a culvert under a farm access road. Concrete walls, concrete floor, open top. There was nothing in it that should produce light. There were no utility lines. There were no junction boxes. There was no reason for anything to glow. But something was glowing. I stood at the edge of the shoulder and looked down into the ditch. The light was coming from an object sitting on the channel floor. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing, because what I was seeing didn't belong there in any way I could rationalize. It was a night light. A plug-in night light, the kind shaped like a seashell or a crescent moon, the kind you put in a child's bedroom so they can see if they wake up in the dark. It was plugged into nothing. It was sitting on bare concrete at the bottom of a drainage channel on a rural highway at 3 a.m. And it was on. The light it cast was small but warm. It illuminated perhaps 2 feet in every direction. In that circle of light, the concrete floor of the channel looked clean. Not highway clean, home clean. As if someone had swept it and washed it and laid something soft down, although there was nothing soft there. The light simply made the concrete look like a floor that someone cared about. I could not go down there. Our protocol prohibits entering drainage structures during active remediation, confined space rules, atmospheric hazard potential, liability. Malcolm would have sent me home for the night if he'd seen me climb into a ditch on a live scene. So I stood at the edge and I looked. The night light glowed. Beyond it, farther down the channel, I thought I saw other objects. Darker shapes against the concrete. I couldn't resolve them at that distance, in that light. But they were arranged, not scattered, not random. Placed. The way you place things on a shelf. The way you organize a room. I took 4 photographs. Phone only. I didn't use the company camera because I didn't want these on the server. Not yet. Not until I understood what the server was going to do to them. Then I went back to my zone and finished the job. When we packed up at 4:50 a.m., I walked back to the shoulder and looked down into the ditch. The night light was gone. The channel floor was bare concrete, stained with runoff sediment, cracked in 2 places, exactly what it should have been. On my phone, the 4 photographs showed the night light. They showed the warm circle of light on the concrete. And they showed, just barely visible at the edge of the frame in the 4th image, the other objects I'd been unable to resolve. A stuffed animal. A small blanket, folded. A plastic sippy cup with a lid. A child's things. Arranged carefully in a drainage ditch on a highway where 2 adults had died and no child had ever been present. I showed the photographs to Ray the next day. He looked at them for a long time and then asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Have you checked the fatality profiles?" "What do you mean?" "The people who died. At the scenes where you're finding things. Have you looked at who they were?" I hadn't. The remediation forms give us names and ages, but I'd never had a reason to look further. The names were just labels, identifiers for the paperwork, not people I was going to know anything about. Once the scene is released, the dead are no longer our responsibility. They're the coroners, the families, the funeral homes. We clean where they were. We don't follow where they go. But Ray's question stuck. That evening, I ran the incident numbers from my notebook against publicly available records. Obituaries. News reports. Social media. Court filings, in the cases where the crashes had involved criminal charges. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking for a pattern. The pattern took 2 hours to find. I started with I-70 westbound, mile marker 214. The first scene. The shoes. The booster seat. The man who died alone. His name was Kevin Dalton. Age 26. Single. No children. Employed as a warehouse supervisor in Springfield. His obituary listed his parents, 2 brothers, and a girlfriend. No mention of children. No children appeared in any photograph on his social media, which was sparse, a few fishing trips, a Cleveland Browns jersey, a selfie at a concert. Kevin Dalton had never had a child. He was 26 and alone on a highway at 1 a.m. and he hit a bridge abutment and that was the end of his future. But 3 sets of shoes had appeared at his scene. Men's, women's, children's. A family. The family he was going to have. I moved to the next scene. I-75 southbound, mile marker 38. The head-on. 2 fatalities. The driver of the first car was a woman named Sarah Kessler, 31. The front passenger was her husband, Marcus Kessler, 34. They were married. No children. Sarah's obituary mentioned that they had been planning to start a family. Her sister was quoted in a news article saying they'd been trying for 2 years. At their scene, I had found a child's drawing. "Come home safe, Daddy." Bare footprints, child-sized, walking away from the crash. The children they were trying to have. I went through each scene in my notebook. The woman on I-70 at mile marker 77, 43, single, no children. Music box and a hand mirror on the server photo. The man on I-675 from Ray's older phone, 29, engaged, no children. The figure of a child standing on the closed highway, watching the crew leave. Every scene where the objects appeared, the person who died was either alone, childless, or in the early stages of building a family they hadn't completed yet. Not every fatality, not the elderly, not the parents who already had grown children, not the ones whose futures were largely behind them. The phenomenon, if that's what it was specific. It selected for potential. For unbuilt lives. For the people who were still carrying their future inside them when the concrete or the guardrail or the cable barrier interrupted everything. I wrote this up in the notebook. 4 pages. I showed it to Ray. He read it slowly. Then he said something that changed the shape of everything. "Danny, what happens to the things that show up on the server but not in your photos?" I didn't understand the question. "The extra items," he said. "The 4th pair of shoes. The 2nd birthday card. The mirror next to the music box. The things the server adds. Have you checked whether those correspond to anything?" I hadn't. I went back. I pulled up every server image that diverged from my phone backup and I cataloged the differences. The extra items. The alterations. The additions that I hadn't photographed because they hadn't existed when I was standing there. Then I cross-referenced. The 4th pair of shoes, the small gray canvas sneakers that appeared on the server photo from the Dalton scene, were a size and style consistent with a child of approximately 8 years. Kevin Dalton was 26 when he died. If he'd had his first child at the average age for American men, around 30, that child would have been roughly 8 years old when Dalton himself would have turned 38. The server wasn't showing me what I saw. It wasn't showing me what was there when I stood on the shoulder at 3 a.m. It was showing me the future advancing. The 4th pair of shoes belonged to a child who, if Dalton had lived, would have existed 12 years from now. A child who would have been 8. A child whose shoes were gray canvas because that was the shoe she would have chosen, or that her mother would have bought, or that the household would have defaulted to. The server images were updating. Not randomly. Not through error. They were tracking the unlived timeline as if it were still running somewhere just behind the surface of the photographs, aging the phantom families in real time. I checked the coin seen at mile marker 22. The original 7 coins I'd photographed matched my phone backup. The server showed 8, the $50. I'd worked that scene 3 months ago. 3 months during which, if the dead man's unborn child had existed, that child would have grown. The $50, the additional denomination, the largest coin, appeared as if the collection were incrementing. As if someone were adding to a piggy bank. I checked the music box scene. My phone showed the box open and playing. The server showed it closed, with a hand mirror beside it. The hand mirror had a crack across the glass. The woman who died at that scene was 43. If she'd had a daughter at the average age, that daughter would now be in her early 20s. Old enough to own a hand mirror. Old enough to have cracked it. The objects on the server were not errors. They were the possessions of people who were still growing up in a timeline that had been severed from ours but hadn't stopped. Somewhere, on the server, in the photographs, in whatever medium the highway uses to hold what spills out of the dead, the children were getting older. I brought this to Malcolm on a Wednesday afternoon, the notebook open to the cross-reference pages, the phone and server photos laid out side by side on his desk. He looked at everything. He spent about 20 minutes going through it methodically, the way he assesses a scene, systematic, unhurried, thorough. When he was done, he stacked the pages neatly and pushed them back across the desk. "Gail told me something else," he said. "Something I didn't mention before because I thought she was wrong. She said, don't track them. Don't follow the timeline. Don't map it. The moment you start treating it like data, it starts treating you like a variable." "What does that mean?" "I don't know. She said it and then she retired and I never asked her to clarify because I thought she was being dramatic." He paused. "But I'll tell you what I've noticed in the 7 years since. The techs who see the objects and keep working, they're fine. They see them, they note them, they let them go. The objects appear and disappear and the job gets done. Ray's been noticing things for 8 months and he's functional. Cass has been noticing for longer than she'll admit, and she's fine. And the ones who aren't fine. There was one. Before Ray. A tech named Paul Ibarra. He did exactly what you're doing. He cataloged. He cross-referenced. He built a timeline. He tracked which scenes produced which objects and he mapped the demographic profile of the dead and he calculated the ages of the unborn children and he started visiting the scenes on his days off to see if the objects appeared without the remediation crew present. Did they? I don't know. Paul stopped coming to work about 6 weeks into his research. Not dramatically, he didn't quit, didn't break down, didn't make a scene. He just stopped showing up. I called him. He answered. He said he was fine. He said he'd found something and he needed time to think about it. Found what? He wouldn't say. I went to his apartment after a week of silence. He let me in. The apartment was clean. He was calm. He was sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop open and his notebook beside it and a cup of coffee that was cold. He looked like he'd been sitting there for a long time. Malcolm stopped. He picked up his pen, turned it over, put it down again. On his laptop screen was a photograph. One of his server photos, from a scene he'd worked on I-70 about 2 months prior. Single fatality. 24-year-old woman. No children. No spouse. What was in the photograph? Paul. Paul was in the photograph. Standing at the edge of the frame, on the far shoulder, the same way the child appeared in Ray's photos from the I-675 scene. Except it wasn't Paul now. It was Paul younger. Maybe 5 or 6 years old. Wearing a shirt I recognized from a photo his mother had posted on Facebook, a family Christmas photo from 1993. I didn't say anything. Paul was a future that someone was carrying. His mother had been 22 when she had him. The woman who died in that crash was 24. Paul's theory, the last thing he said to me before I left his apartment, was that the timelines don't just show the children of the dead. They show all unrealized lives. All the people who could have existed, branching forward from every death, intersecting, overlapping. And sometimes, the person looking at the photographs is one of those branches. Not born from the specific person who died, but resonant with them. Part of the same web of unmade futures. Where's Paul now? He works at a Lowe's in Beaver Creek. He's fine. He just doesn't do this anymore. He told me the last thing he found before he stopped was a photograph on the server that showed a child who looked like him standing next to a child who looked like his daughter. His actual daughter. His real, living, 6-year-old daughter. That scared him. No. That's the thing. He said it didn't scare him. He said it made him feel something much worse. It made him feel like his daughter had been seen, acknowledged, included, by whatever leaves the objects on the highway. And he said the feeling of his child being known by something he couldn't name or locate or control was the one thing he was not willing to sit with. Malcolm looked at me. So I'm asking you, Danny. Not as your crew chief. Not as an order. I'm asking you the way Gail asked me and the way I should have asked Paul before he figured it out himself. Do you want to keep tracking this? Because you can. There's nothing stopping you. But the deeper you map it, the more it maps you. And I don't know where that ends because nobody I've worked with has ever gone further than Paul, and Paul walked away. I sat with that. I sat with it for 3 days. I went to work. I cleaned a scene on State Route 4, minor, no fatalities, no objects. I cleaned a scene on I-75, a single fatality motorcycle crash, and found a pacifier on the guardrail that was gone by the time I looked twice. I photographed it. I didn't check the server. On the 4th day I drove to the Lowe's in Beaver Creek. I found Paul Ibarra in the electrical aisle, stocking circuit breakers. He was a normal-looking guy in his early 30s, orange apron, name tag, inventory scanner on his belt. I told him who I was. I told him I worked for CleanPath. His face changed, not dramatically, but like a door closing quietly behind his eyes. I don't talk about that, he said. I know. Malcolm told me why. I'm not asking you to talk about the objects or the photographs or the timelines. I'm asking you one question and then I'll leave. He waited. The photograph on your server. The one that showed you as a child, standing at a scene you cleaned. Did it appear before or after you started tracking the pattern? He stocked a breaker. He stocked another one. He set down the box and looked at me. After, he said. It appeared the day after I completed the demographic cross-reference. The exact same analysis you've done, I can tell from your face that you've done it. It appeared the day after I mapped the ages of the unborn children against the server additions. As if the act of understanding the pattern was what made me visible to it. He picked up his box. The photograph isn't on the server anymore, by the way. I checked, a year after I left. I had a friend at CleanPath pull it up. The image file is there. The metadata is there. But it's just a photo of an empty shoulder. The child that was me is gone. I stopped looking, and it let me go. He paused. Or I stopped looking, and it found someone else to look at. He went back to stalking, and I left. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. The composition notebook was in the passenger seat. I could feel it like a weight, like a temperature, like the warmth of a nightlight plugged into nothing. I thought about the booster seat in my rearview mirror. The quarter-second of a child's laughter from the back seat of my car. A car that has never held a child. A life that has not yet produced one. I am 31 years old. I am not married. I do not have children. But I'm alive, and that means my future is still inside me, unbuilt, unborn, theoretically infinite. And something on the highway can see it. Something that precipitates from the dead can recognize the living futures walking past, and it reaches for them the way a child reaches for a hand in the dark. I haven't opened the server in 11 days. The notebook is in my glove compartment. I haven't written in it. I haven't checked whether my phone photos match the server photos from the last 3 scenes I worked. I don't want to know what the server is showing now. I don't want to know if there's a new image. I don't want to know if I'm in it. I still go to work. I still ride in the box truck. I still put on the Tyvek and the respirator and get on my knees in the dark. I still smell the clean laundry in the impact zones, and I still see the shoes and the drawings and the toys arranged along guardrails and fog lines and drainage ditches at 3 a.m. on highways where someone's entire future emptied out onto the pavement. I just don't look as long anymore. Last night we worked a scene on I-70 eastbound, mile marker 189. Single fatality. 19-year-old woman. College student. No spouse, no children, no emergency contact except her parents. She'd fallen asleep and drifted into the median barrier. I cleaned the impact zone. Standard enzyme, scrub, wash. The contamination was light, the barrier had done its job, and the vehicle's safety systems had limited the external dispersion. Routine, as much as any of this can be. When I finished and stood up, stretching my back, I saw something on the median barrier itself. Not biological material. Not debris. Something scratched into the coating of the cable, about chest height, in letters so small I almost missed them. I leaned in. I read them under my flashlight. MOM. One word. Scratched into the vinyl coating of a cable barrier on an active interstate by no one. The scratch marks were fresh, the exposed metal underneath was bright, not oxidized. They had been made tonight. During our closure. While we were working. I didn't photograph it. I didn't write it down. I stood there with my flashlight on that single word for maybe 10 seconds, and then I turned the flashlight off and went back to the truck and helped Ray pack the equipment. On the drive back to the yard, Cass sat beside me in the dark. She hadn't said anything all night. That wasn't unusual for Cass. But about 10 minutes into the drive, she spoke. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" She was quiet for a while. "In the truck. When we're driving back. After a scene like that. A young one. Do you hear it?" I listened. The truck's engine. The road surface under the tires. The rattle of equipment in the cargo bay. Malcolm's radio, low, in the cab. And underneath all of it, so faint it might have been the vibration of the chassis or the resonance of the cargo bay walls or nothing at all, a sound like humming. Like someone humming a song to a child. Steady, tuneless, patient. "Yes," I said. Cass nodded. She put her head back against the wall of the truck and closed her eyes. "It gets louder," she said. "The longer you do this." Not much. Not fast. But a little bit more each year. Gail used to hum along with it. Did Malcolm tell you that? He hadn't. She didn't think it was scary. She said it was the most natural sound in the world. She said it was just a mother comforting a child who would never be born, and the least we could do was let her finish the song. The truck drove on. The highway was empty. The humming continued, or didn't. I couldn't tell anymore whether I was hearing it or remembering it or imagining it. I don't know if there's a version of the future where I have a child. I don't know if something on the highway has already seen that child, already knows their name, already has their shoes ready to set by a guardrail on a night I don't come home. I don't check the server. I don't open the notebook. I go to work. I clean what's left. I drive home in the dark and I listen to the sound in the truck that might be the engine or might be a song, and when I pull into my driveway and turn off the ignition, the silence that replaces it is the loudest thing I've ever heard. The highway gives things back. I just don't know yet what it's going to ask for in return.